In Everybody to Kenmure Street, neighbours and activists rushed to surround an immigration van detaining two residents in Scotland's most diverse community. Everybody to Kenmure Street is directed by Philippe Bustos-Sierra and is his second feature after Ne Passaron. Everybody to Kenmure Street just debuted at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival. Everybody to Kenmure Street is centered on the events of the 13th of May 2021 when a Home Office raid in Pollokshield, Glasgow prompted hundreds of locals to take to the area's Kenmure Street. Immigration at the time were using dawn raids to surprise refugees and people staying illegally in Scotland, and I think the local communities at the time were kind of fed up with these tactics. And the two men in this incident who were taken by immigration into the van, they had cases with immigration at the time and they were legally being processed. So I think the locals at the time were like sick of the immigration using illegal tactics to detain people, and these raids were really the last stand at the time. And this film really captures it. This film is basically just like footage, like mobile phone footage and video camera footage from local people who participated in the protests and who neighbours, like, because there's kind of like apartments surrounding this street and they're like looking down, and so there's this this documentary is comprised of this footage and also interviews with people who were involved in the protests, and also there's kind of like reenactments. I think that, I don't know, I'm not sure why, but there was about 3 or 4 people who were heavily involved in these protests. They reenacted by other people, and I think it's either because they didn't want to be involved with the film, or maybe they still have legal cases being processed through the courts. Maybe that's why they weren't involved with the film. But yeah, there's about 4 or 5 people who they had to be their real words were used in the film, but they had to be spoken by an actor. So we see a protest, like people, like local people in the community, neighbours, and people who know these two men. They start spreading messages around on WhatsApp and social media and just text messages. And eventually, throughout the morning and throughout the day, thousands of people end up gathering on Kenmure Street, and they surround this van, so the van can't leave. And there's one man who ends up getting underneath the van, and there's a whole big story about how he's underneath the van and then he's in danger, and we have to protect him so the van can't leave. And in the second half of the film, it gets quite interesting because we get to see the history of Glasgow and the history of local communities, like fighting back against this authoritarian regime, and like the government. Like, I think the government doesn't really listen to the community, doesn't really listen to the people who live there when they decide to do something in the community. So I think that's why the Glasgow has such a history of protesting and long protests, and it has like a bit of a 5-minute 5 minutes in the film dedicated to this like very long protest that lasted about 4 or 5 months. And so the style of the film, it has a lot of black and white footage and history of the community fighting back against the government about things they think are getting out of hand. And in the second half of the film, we see the history of how like Glasgow was basically founded from the money from wealthy people, and these wealthy people they got this money from slavery from Africa and India and the Caribbean countries. And I was not really aware of that, because in films and documentary we really see how America was founded on slavery, but we don't really see a lot about how England and Scotland and other countries in Europe really benefited off the wealth of slavery in the 19th century. And we really see how the wealth of the people who founded Glasgow and built all the buildings around, and kind of like showed off the wealth around Glasgow by building all these buildings, that it really came from slavery. So that was very interesting to see, because I was not really aware of that. But for me, there's like information like this information about slavery, and there's other information about the history of protests and community and the diverse type of people who live in this area of Kenmure Street and Pollock Shield. And there's information that's like revealed in the second half of the film that I think, I'm not sure, it would have been better to introduce this. It would have been like a linear approach to the documentary. It would have been a little bit better just to, especially if at the start of the film, would have been better, because then once we get to the protests in Kenmure Street, the context and the history of this area and the people who live there and the history of Glasgow, I think it would have made a bit more sense, because the first half of the film, we're just introduced to people who are going to the protests, and we're just like, why are they doing this? Why are they so invested in these two men? Why are they so quick to gather around this van and protest in such a fierce and fight back against the police in such a fierce way? I think if we knew the history of this street and in Glasgow, and the history of Glasgow in the first half of the film, I think it would have made a bit more of an impact once we get to the protest. But I still think this film is very engaging. The interviews with the people who are involved in the protest are very engaging, and then once we get to the final conclusion to the film, it's quite emotional. So, but just for me, I think I would have liked someone who's not from Scotland, someone who's not from Glasgow. I would have liked that bit of context and bit of history about the country and the community, just to just so I understood what was going on a little bit more. I give Everybody to Kenmure Street 3.5 stars out of 5. I definitely recommend checking out this film. It's very engaging. It gets quite emotional in the conclusion of the film, and there's a lot of interesting information, especially in the second half of the film, about the history of Scotland and Glasgow, and where all the wealth came from, and the diverse communities that live in communities like Pollock Shield and Kenmure Street, and so that was very interesting. I just wish that a lot of the information that we find out in the second half of the film, I wish that the filmmaker treated the film as a bit of a more linear approach to the information that we find out throughout the film. But I still definitely recommend checking out this film, Everybody to Kenmure Street. It's a very engaging, emotional, interesting film. Thanks for watching. What did you think of Everybody to Kenmure Street? Please comment below what you thought of the film. See you next time. Bye.